really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here again today. And I'm going to keep talking about change and what it requires in order to change, grow, and transform in your life. If you haven't listened to last week's episode yet, number 115, you might want to go back and listen to that. And also, if you want to learn more, last week I talked about the stages and the levels of consciousness. And I spoke about that in much more depth in the past in episodes 65, 66, and 67. So if you're not familiar with the various levels of consciousness, I was talking about traditional, rational, pluralistic, and integral. Go back to those 3 episodes and you'll get a really good introduction to these levels of consciousness in our society and how they manifest. I did a really brief summary last week of these 4 stages. And one of the points to remember from last week is that change, growth, and transformation get easier with each subsequent level of consciousness. So change is most difficult for people who are at the traditional level, gets a little bit easier for people at the rational level, and is even easier for people who are pluralistic. And as I mentioned last week, because they are able to be self-reflective, they tend to be open-minded, willing to take in new information, and capable of understanding the point of view of at least some other people, capable of seeing beyond just their own narrow frame of reference. And those are some of the capacities that are necessary for change and growth. And as I said last week, if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance that you are pluralistic, because again, the pluralistic stage is where we begin to seek information, we seek wisdom. We're actually feeling motivated to grow and learn. And so we seek out different people to listen to and different ideas and things to look at and ways of looking at our own lives. And it's also at the pluralistic stage when we're usually willing to take up practices that can help us grow and change, to do things like yoga and meditation and journaling that can help us reflect on ourselves, help us do shadow work and look within, and help us really amplify the opportunity for change within. So today I'll talk a little bit more about what change requires. And I have a few quotes from Rumi, which Rumi has been one of my role models, one of my omega points throughout my journey. And Rumi wrote, "Try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. And do not worry that your life is turning upside down." I think this is a great quote that describes where probably most of us are, in a sense, on our journey, especially if you're at the pluralistic level. You have experienced downturns and difficulties and challenges in life, and you're at the place of trying to use those difficult times as fuel for growth, which is what Rumi is telling us to do. Don't get discouraged when there are downturns, when things don't go the way you thought they would. Let life live itself through you. Be open and willing to embrace whatever comes your way. And that is how you are most likely to keep growing and transforming and changing. The moment you begin to resist and to push back and say, no, I refuse this. I don't want this to happen. I don't want this change to come my way. Then you can slow down the process of your growth. You can actually create obstacles to it yourself. So I really like this thought of life is living through us, and that life itself is the change that is trying to happen. Life itself is transformation. And life will manifest change through us if we let it happen and if we allow it. So that ends up being part of the lesson of surrendering and learning to accept and go with the flow when challenges come our way, instead of trying to force things to go a different direction, which can just exhaust us and wear us down and make it even more difficult for us to change. And I have another quote from Rumi, and this applies to those of us at the pluralistic level, because when we reach this level and we develop sensitivity toward others, we have concern for other human beings, for people who are downtrodden and marginalized. We have concerns for the planet, for animals on the planet, really concerns for everything that's happening around us. And here's another quote from Rumi, though, that really speaks to this. Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. And I think one of the pitfalls at the pluralistic level is that we see where change is needed in the world. It's pretty easy for us to recognize it and see it outside of ourselves. And we may expend a lot of energy trying to change the world, trying to change the way things are outside of us, around us. But Rumi reminds us that true wisdom says we actually have to change ourselves first. We have to work on ourselves. And actually, once we are doing our own inner work and we're changing ourselves, allowing ourselves to change, that's actually what will change the world around us. But if we focus our energies too much outside of ourselves, trying to change everything around us, and forget about the fact that we ourselves need to change within, then we may just be spinning our wheels, and we may get discouraged and frustrated and exhausted and feel like, I'm doing all this work and nothing is happening, nothing is changing, because we're working outside of ourselves, trying to make external changes, when our focus needs to be, how do I change me? What is going on with me? So that's what I want to focus on, is how do we work on ourselves and change ourselves so that we can continue to grow and transform? What is it that we can change within ourselves that will allow us to let life live through us? So I have a list here of some things that I believe are required of us in order to change. And first of all, we have to have some sort of self-awareness. As I described, self-awareness at the traditional level is not really allowed, because it's not encouraged to think of yourself as a separate individual. You're part of the tribe, a part of the group, and you do what the group tells you to do. You do not think for yourself. So self-awareness is discouraged and really stifled at the traditional level. Self-awareness really comes on track in the rational level, where we begin to see ourselves as an individual with our own strengths and things that we can do and accomplish. We start seeking out our own purpose in the world and finding our own meaning in life. So some degree of self-awareness and being able to look at ourselves is essential in order to change. We also need to have a sense of something not being fully complete, that there's work to be done. So in a way, it's like a little bit of dissatisfaction with where things are, not being totally complacent. So if you think about, that's a bit of a paradox, and there's a balance we have to attain here between being aware that the change could happen. Something could change. Something could be different than it is right now. But being willing also at the same time to surrender, to not be trying to push or force the change, but to know that something isn't quite finished yet or isn't complete. So I'm on my way toward something else. I'm not even sure what it is, but I know that there's something there. There's a place I can move toward, a way that I can grow more, a way that I can transform more. So we have that awareness that something isn't quite finished yet, but we're also able to surrender to it because with our own minds, we actually can't perceive where it is we're going to go next. We don't quite know. How am I going to grow? How will I transform? In the future, we aren't fully aware. We aren't sure of where we're headed. So we cannot really plot out a course for ourselves of where we're headed. All we can do is be in the moment, this moment, and work on whatever issues arise in this moment. That's how we will best support the growth that is trying to happen through us. I hope that makes some sense, that it is this paradox of at once being aware that change needs to happen and being ready and open to change without trying to force the change, with allowing the change to happen is the mindset that we need to have. And next, for change to happen, we need to have both the willingness and the ability to look at our own past and to work on healing rather than placing blame on other people or other situations in life. So it's really essential that we be able to stop and self-reflect and look back at our past and look at life and what life has brought us and be aware of our own wounds. What are my triggers? Where do I lose my way? Where do I go off emotionally? In what situations? Because those are places where some sort of healing is necessary, and I need to heal something that happened in the past that created a wound for me. So we have to be willing to look at the past and also able. We have to have enough consciousness to be able to really examine ourselves and examine our own inner life. And that is especially present during the pluralistic stage, when we can begin to examine ourselves and look at ourselves. The third thing that change requires is that we are able to take responsibility for our own actions and also for our emotions, our wounds, our triggers. So we have to be able to look at them and be willing to heal them. And one step further, take responsibility. This is something I find so important to be reminded of right now at this particular time in our society, because when I look at social media, I see so many messages that talk about other people being narcissists, other people are gaslighting, other people are doing things to harm you. And I feel that there's a mentality that supports being a victim and placing blame on other people for anything that has gone wrong in life. And it's not that none of us have been victimized. Lots of us have been victimized. We have been wounded and harmed by other people. But the fact is, to dwell in a place of victimhood, the energy of being a victim, does not help us grow. That's actually a place where we can be stuck, because our energy, when we're seeing ourselves as a victim and operating from victim consciousness, our energy goes toward blaming other people and figuring out what other people did wrong and how they are harming us, and also toward avoiding anyone else who might cause us harm. So once again, we're projecting our energy outward toward others instead of using it to heal ourselves. And so I don't want this to sound calloused or uncaring toward people who have been harmed by others, because definitely that that's a serious situation. And definitely you need to be treated with compassion and caring and love. But at the end of the day, within you, you carry a wound, and the wound is now yours. It may have been caused by someone else, but the wound is yours now. It's part of you. And so it is your responsibility to figure out, what do I do with the wound that I have? How will I carry it? Can I heal it? Is there a way I can work on this? And how will I behave in light of the wound that I have? So Carolyn Mace talks about living in the wound, or living from the wound, and what she means by that is living life as a victim and constantly recalling and remembering how others have caused harm. And once again, projecting energy out and blaming other people instead of saying, yes, that happened. I didn't deserve for it to happen. It's unfortunate that it happened, but it did. That's a reality. That happened. I have a wound now. And I also have a choice of living within the wound and being a perpetual victim of that wound, or of deciding, this is my wound and I'm going to figure out, how do I best live as someone who has been wounded in the past? How can I become my best person and live my best life? What steps do I need to take to make sure that I don't get stuck there? How can I expand around this wound, integrate it into who I am as a person, and move forward with my strengths and my best qualities? So that's this requirement of being able to take responsibility for the wounds, just choosing not to be a victim, and take responsibility for how we behave emotionally when our wounds get triggered, and being willing to do very serious work on those wounds, with those wounds, to try to find healing. Another thing that I think change requires, and I was talking about this last week when I said I was really disappointed with the way the series Succession ended, because it seemed to me there was an opportunity in that show to model transformation for at least one character who was on the verge of perhaps changing and becoming a better person and making different choices, but it didn't happen in the end. I don't want to spoil the show for anyone who might be watching it. But one of the things that I think is important for each of us as we are working to grow, evolve, become our highest selves, is that we find an omega point. And the omega point is actually comes from the level of consciousness that's ahead of us. And it is an inspiration. It's a role model. It could be a mentor, a teacher. It could be text, a higher wisdom text. Like I read Rumi's poetry and philosophy, and that's an omega point for me that reminds me to keep moving forward and to keep working on myself. So having some sort of an omega point, something that comes from a higher level of consciousness than we are at right now, that draws us toward it, that pulls us in a sense, that keeps informing us, keeps reminding us, oh yes, there's more than what I can see right now. I'm limited in how I see life and myself and the world right now, but there's something beyond this, and I see it in that omega point. I see it in that teacher, in that role model, in that person I met, in that book that I read, in that music that I listened to. I see it. I see that there's something bigger than the moment that I'm living in right now. And one way or another, somehow, I'm on a path to move toward that omega point. So I hope that makes sense. But each one of us can utilize some sort of role model to help us on our way. It kind of helps us. It's like a guidepost in the future of, a reminder, that's where I'm headed toward. I'm headed toward that way of seeing the world. I can't quite do it myself yet, but that's where I'm going. And all the work and all the downturns and all the struggles and the difficulties are coming together to help move me toward that omega point. So it's why I also believe that our media, I think movies and books and stories and plays and even music can provide omega points for people, especially when they model the fact that change is possible, transformation is possible. It can happen. It keeps alive that inspiration and desire to experience change and to grow. So for me, I'm always working on, can I be a role model for others myself? And part of doing this podcast is my commitment to that. I try in the books that I write, that I try to share whatever wisdom I've learned on the path myself, so that someone who's coming along on a similar path might be able to gain something from it. But I also want to create stories, like fiction stories, but stories that are true in the sense that they show growth and transformation. So I'm feeling motivated to do some other writing, which may happen in the future. That's something that's coming to me. So I think each one of us needs to look ahead and find the omega point that keeps us on track and that continually calls us forward, but also look back and recognize, what kind of omega point am I being for someone who's maybe a step or two behind me? Am I shining a light so that other people can see it as well and can find their way a little bit better on this journey? So find an omega point for yourself and be willing to be an omega point for someone else. Another thing that I think change requires, and this is hard for us to accept, is that something falls apart. Because it's as if we keep building structures, whatever level of consciousness we're at, we build a structure to create stability for ourselves at that level of consciousness. And for a while, that structure really helps support us. It helps us with our footing. It helps keep us on track in this level of consciousness, the structure that we build around us. But at some point, the structure itself becomes an obstacle to how we keep growing and moving beyond. And so we have to keep disassembling the structures that we created before. We have to be willing to let things fall apart a little bit and to see, oh, you know what? I've grown. Like, I no longer need what I needed last year to support me. I don't need that anymore. I need something new now. I need something different. So we have to be willing to let the old fall away. Sometimes it's not just that we let it fall away. Sometimes things are ripped away from us. Sometimes everything falls apart. We lose our jobs. We lose a loved one. We lose our health. We lose our way. We lose our mental health and our love for life. We can go through all kinds of dark times and challenging times. It is also part of the growth process. And I've alluded a number of times to the butterfly, the stages of a butterfly's development, and that when the caterpillar enters the chrysalis and begins to dissolve away, that's a complete catastrophe and a disaster for the caterpillar, and yet it's necessary for the imaginal cells to be released so that they can come together for the butterfly to form. So we have many, many examples in nature that things do dissolve away and they fall apart and crumble, or we simply don't need them anymore and we have to discard them when we're on this journey toward growth and transformation. And it is painful. There's no question about it. It hurts. It hurts to let go of things that used to bring us joy and comfort and safety and security. It's painful, and particularly when loved ones die or our relationships come to an end. It's one of the most painful things we can ever experience. And yet this experience of loss and letting go is also part of allowing life to live through us. And look around you at nature, you see endless examples of the fact that in nature, the old falls away and dies and nourishes the new. And it's a metaphor, but it's a reality in life, and it's a law of the universe. And it's how we have to learn to live our own lives, allowing things to fall apart, allowing losses to occur. We can't stop them. We can't prevent it from happening. All we can do is prepare ourselves and be resilient as possible, be loss hardy in a way, loss tolerant, so that we know how to get through those times, and we know how to get through the darkness and how to see ahead to that omega point, perhaps shining way off at the end of the tunnel, and know this is where I am right now. This is a time of loss. This is a time of things falling apart, but I am still on this journey. I'm still in this process. I'm still growing. I'm still evolving. I'm still changing toward what is going to come next. Again, acknowledging we don't fully know what is coming next. We don't exactly know who we are going to be next year when we get through whatever situation we're in right now. So we're not trying to control it or make that happen. We're trying to allow it to happen. So figuring out how to embrace the fact that things do fall apart in our process of growth. That's an essential lesson for us to learn on this journey. And the next thing that change requires, also very hard, is forgiveness. That we have to be able to forgive in order to heal. We have to forgive life for allowing us to be hurt, for allowing us to experience loss. Forgive the fact that life contains equal parts of loss and joy. And that hurts. I mean, that doesn't feel great to us most of the time, but we have to be able to forgive life for that. We have to forgive ourselves for choices we've made, things we may regret. And if we have been harmed by others, it's essential that we be able to forgive in the sense of letting go of the blame and the resentment that we're carrying, letting go of the anger and the hatred that we're carrying towards someone who has harmed us. Because when we hold on to all of that negativity, we continue to allow ourselves to be harmed by the initial act that happened. And so we need to be in a place of neutrality, in a sense, where we acknowledge we've been harmed, but we simply don't want to give energy to reliving and re-blaming the person who harmed us. We want to be at a more neutral place where we don't waste our energy or our time on that. We acknowledge the wound. We bring compassion to our own wounds and love and healing to our own wounds, but we let go of the person who caused it. They are creating their own hell, in a sense. They are creating their own pain that they will continue to experience throughout life, and that is their journey. But we don't need to continue to be harmed by the initial harm that was done by another person. We can choose to calm down the negativity as much as possible. And I'm not saying that you try to forget what happened or pretend like it didn't happen. Not at all. You continue to acknowledge that a wound was created and harm was done. It's just that you don't expend energy toward hatred of the person who caused the wound. You focus on integrating the wound into your life, into who you are, and how do you become a whole person, a healing person, in spite of the wound that you're carrying. I know a lot of people push back. And these days, again, as I was saying, the idea of forgiveness is kind of an anathema to a lot of people who feel like forgiveness is weak. That is just letting someone get away with behaving terribly and not requiring that they face the consequence. But the fact is, we cannot create a consequence for someone who has hurt us to the degree that life can. Life is going to deal with the person who hurt us. Life is going to provide the consequences for that person. It's not our job. Now, definitely, we shouldn't continue to be in the presence of someone so toxic and so hurtful toward us. That's not a requirement at all. We can completely eliminate that person from our lives. We don't need to have an ongoing relationship with that person. But in fact, if we continue to hold anger and hatred toward that person, in a way, we are continuing the relationship, and we're continuing it in a way that's harmful to us and harmful to our own health. So in this sense, it is the most helpful to your health if you can back away and let go of the blame and anger and resentment. Acknowledge your own wound, bring love and compassion to it, hold your wound, be present with it and carry it and allow it to become integrated into your life. And if necessary, remove that person from your life. Do not continue to be in the presence of that person if they are causing ongoing harm. And that's a decision that you will have to make based on whatever you experience within you, whatever your intuition is telling you or your inner guidance is telling you is right for you. So when I say forgiveness, again, I'm not saying, oh, ignore that someone hurt you and let it be and allow them to continue abusing you or hurting you. I'm not saying that at all. I'm only saying that you remove your energy from that person. And whether you have positive feelings or negative feelings, remove your energy from that person so that you can utilize it for your own growth and healing. And then the last step, and I mentioned this last week, that in order to grow, and particularly to go from the pluralistic stage to integral, you have to work with the ego. And I'll talk about this a little bit more because the ego for us in lower consciousness, the ego is the driver of our lives. The ego is the lens through which we look at the world. The ego controls what we see, how we see it, how we react, how we respond to our own emotions. But our higher consciousness is capable of managing the ego. We're not asking the ego to go away. We're not trying to destroy the ego. We're trying to recognize the ego and how it behaves and where it exists, understand the ego, how the ego's been wounded, what the ego is carrying in the shadow, and how it affects our own behavior, the decisions we make, the way we talk to other people and deal with other people. And we are training our higher consciousness to manage the ego and to begin to direct our lives instead of allowing the ego to be in charge. And as I mentioned last week, that's the entire theme of the book, The Journey from Ego to Soul, soul being our higher consciousness. And how do we get to a place where we are living a soul-guided life instead of an ego-driven life? That change to become soul-guided is essential if we're going to continue to grow and expand in consciousness and to get to the integral level of consciousness. And here's one last Rumi quote that addresses that topic. To change, you must face the dragon of your appetites with another dragon, the life energy of the soul. And so the dragon of your appetites, that describes the ego perfectly. The ego is all about your appetites and desires, your fear and greed, and your feeling of not being enough and of wanting more. These all come from the ego. But it is the life energy of the soul that can overpower those qualities of the ego and help manage them. Again, not get rid of the ego, not destroy it, but learn how to live with the ego, empower the ego to become your vehicle in the world, the vehicle for your life energy, your soul life energy. So I hope that makes some sense. As I said, you can learn a lot more about it if you read the book, The Journey from Ego to Soul. You can find it on Amazon. You can ask bookstores to order it as well. It's in their Ingram book catalog. So I encourage you to continue doing this work and thinking about how you can continue to grow and transform, how you can take up practices and work on some things that can help you in your growth. So until we're together next time, remember, we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for however life chooses to live through you next, and just love each and every moment that you get to be here on this planet. Bye-bye.